Join me now is Hadia Mirhamadi. She is going to be one of our keynote speakers at our upcoming national conference this fall, October 3rd and 4th. That's a Friday night and a Saturday, October 3rd and 4th in the Mid-South here. Beautiful theater in Collierville, where we're based. Only 350 seats available. Tickets are only $99. We lowered the price drastically. We're able to cut a lot of our costs down by moving it to the Mid-South. And so we're passing that savings on to you. Seating is limited if you want to be with us in person. So check it all out, worldviewstore.com, worldviewstore.com. I wanted to ask Hadia about this article right here. When I die, I want them to say I was Palestinian. This is Bishar Bahaba, the American mediator between Hamas and the U.S. Subtitled, Delusion by Biden and Harris, he backed Trump in the presidential election and helped the Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas draft a congratulatory message while still publicly criticizing Trump's Gaza plan. Baba, who came to the U.S. as an immigrant in the 1970s, now serves as a back channel between Hamas and Washington while bypassing Israel. My children were born in the U.S., but I registered them with UNRWA. That's the UN. All right. This is the second, at least the second, concerning character floating around the Trump administration. I asked Hadia if she would come on and give us a report about this and more. She joins us now. Hadia, thanks for being back with us.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to join you again.
Thank you. Tell me about this. What did you find out about this guy?
Okay, so if you will indulge me, I want to take your listeners back to the Bush administration, because this tale goes back that far. So if you recall, I don't know how much you may have talked about this with your listeners about the Holy Land Foundation trial and all the raids. So there was all these reports. Did you follow that? So there was all these reports
we
about
talked all about that. You know, they're raising money. One's like the largest terrorist funding trial in American history, and then Obama stopped it.
Okay, so basically that was this cabal of Palestinian-born, for the most part, activists that were fighting for not just the Palestinian cause, but the Ikhwan cause. So what the trial was trying to demonstrate, and what the Operation Green Quest raid of IIIT and Safaf Trust back in 2003 was uncovering, was this civilizational jihad plan of the Brotherhood in the United States. Some of those, so they gained influence in the Bush administration through a number of key characters. One of whom was Sohail Khan, who was a staffer for President Bush and a key liaison. His father, Imam Mahbub Khan, was the head of the Santa Clara Mosque, where Ayman Zawahiri had fundraised at least 2 times. That's actually when my career started, because I was outside that Santa Clara Mosque interviewing people that were basically being recruited to go fight jihad in Afghanistan and Bosnia. And I was trying to discover why in the world would American-born Muslims be interested in that. And that's actually when my relationship with the FBI started. So those investigations dated back to the mid-90s. Sohail Khan comes and works for the president, President Bush. And on the outside, we have Grover Norquist, the Americans for Tax Reform, whose wife is a Palestinian, a Muslim Palestinian, and Khalid Safouri. They create the Islamic Institute. So Islamic Institute becomes this freeway for all of these men to basically get involved with the president, to get involved in politics, to be inserted in key staff roles, get internships and what have you. And that influence is basically the beginning of this kind of radical Palestinian effort inside the U.S. government. And the seeds of that kind of remain. So when I go to investigate, who is this Mr. Baba, because historically he was a Democrat. So he wasn't involved. Khalid Safouri, Grover Norquist, access to Karl Rove, all of this was Republican. Mr. Baba apparently was historically a Democrat. but he aligns with Mossad Bolis, who is President Trump's daughter's father-in-law. So Tiffany marries Michael Bolis, and then Mossad Bolis is his father. And so Mossad Bolis somehow gets connected to Baba, not entirely clear how that happens. But the two of them, together with Richard Grenell, start doing this massive outreach to Arab Americans. And this is right before the Trump campaign. There's a meeting in May between Richard Grenell and all of these cast of characters. And the reason I bring up the other guys is because they were at the meeting as well. Khalid Safouri was at that meeting. There's about 40 Arab American activists. I recognized about 4 or 5 of those names, and they were literally all from this 2000 era. So for 25 years, these men have been doing this activism, and that continuum exists in terms of it being like a pro-Hamas, pro-Ikhwan organized group.
Whoa. So let me go back real quick. Grover Norquist.
Yes.
There's been controversy about Grover Norquist related to his association with Islamists for years, correct?
For years, I was personally involved in some knockout, drag-out fights between Khalid Safouri's group and my group, and us saying that they were linked to terrorists, and them saying we were deviant heretics, and it's been a back and forth for years. I actually had a private meeting for David Frum, who actually reported about this stuff that Grover Norquist was doing in his book. He was a speechwriter for Bush. And so I explained this problem. He also referred to it in his book when he published a book about his experiences in the White House. And I actually get sequestered by the Secret Service. They show up at my house, 3 SUVs, tell me to get in the car, drive me off to an undisclosed location, and keep me in there for 3 hours, basically telling me to prove that Sohail Khan represents a threat to the president.
Wait a minute, back up. They wanted you to say what?
So because I was so outspoken about this problem, I knew who Sohail Khan's dad was. I knew his relationship to these Brotherhood and Palestinian groups. I knew about their terror recruiting for Ayman al-Zawahiri. So when I was talking about this with various U.S. officials and members of Congress, I get called in by the Secret Service to explain why I was telling people Sohail Khan was a threat to the president. So I did not tell people he was a physical threat. I was trying to explain he was an ideological threat.
And so what were they asking you to sign?
Well, they were asking me to prove it. So here I am trying to explain to some people. I don't know what they knew about counterterrorism. I don't know what they knew about the Islamic Jihad movement, but I am explaining like 200 years of history to these guys. And so at one point during this interview, they look at me and they're like, "Is this a lover's dispute?" I just said to myself, "Oh my goodness, if that's all you've gotten out of everything I've just said, then I don't think we're ever going to get anywhere with this conversation," because they literally could not wrap their heads around what I was saying, because, you know, there's so many degrees of separation between the first guys and the second guys, and explaining why this son of this other gentleman would have been a problem. And I tried to explain the relationships and these investigations that are ongoing, but I didn't get anywhere.
Wow. Now, did President Bush, George W., ever come to learn about this himself?
I mean, I would suspect so. There was enough people who knew about it, but I think from what I recall back in those days, the largest obstacle was Karl Rove. And so President Bush really trusted Karl Rove, and Karl Rove basically had green-lighted these groups, whether it's from his own relationship or because of Grover. That's not entirely clear to me still to this day, but it was very difficult. I mean, Sohail Khan was eventually moved out of the White House, but his career still continues. I looked him up. He's still involved in various Republican activities. So it wasn't like it was a career destroying moment. But at one point, so Operation Green Quest, 2003, the raid of IIIT and the Safa Trust, there are tax return records that had over $1.2 billion that went through those organizations. So we're not talking a small amount of money. There was giant slush funds that were going God knows where, because, you know, as a private citizen, you can't really figure that out where it went. But that raid never really came to anything. And so it's not really clear what happened as a result of those investigations. I mean, Sami al-Arian, who was a professor at University of South Florida, he eventually got deported.
Look at this I found, November 11th, 2001. This is at newrepublic.com. Grover Norquist's strange alliance with radical Islam. On the afternoon of September 26, George W. Bush gathered 15 prominent Muslims and Arab Americans at the White House. With cameras rolling, the president proclaimed the, quote, teachings of Islam are teaching of peace and good, end quote. It was a critically important moment, a statement to the world that America's Muslim leaders unambiguously reject terror committed in Islam's name. Unfortunately, many of the leaders present hadn't unambiguously rejected it. To the president's left sat Dr. Yahya Basaha, president of the American Muslim Council, an organization whose leaders have repeatedly called Hamas freedom fighters. Also in attendance was Salam al-Maharati, I'm sure I'm not getting these right, executive director of the Muslim Public Affairs Council, who on the afternoon of September 11th told the Los Angeles public radio audience that, quote, we should put the state of Israel on the suspect list, end quote. And sitting next to the President Bush was Muz Amil Sirkoi, however you say that, president of the Islamic Society of North America.
Siddiqui.
That'd be ISNA, right? Who last fall told a Washington crowd chanting pro-Hezbollah slogans, quote, America has to learn if you remain on the side of injustice, the wrath of God will come, end quote. Days later, after a conservative activist confronted Karl Rove with dossiers about some of Bush's new friends, Rove replied, according to the activist, quote, I wish I had known before the event took place, end quote. Do you know who that activist was?
No, because he's not named in that article, right? Okay.
I don't think
I haven't
so,
seen
no.
that particular article. Tons of stuff came out at that time. It was basically me, Frank Gaffney, Steve Emerson, Daniel Pipes, and a couple of other people on one side and the entire Muslim community on the other side. So we faced a tremendously uphill battle to try to get this changed. And ultimately, there was some movement, but it wasn't ultimately very successful. And so when I tell people,
Hadia,
that this, yes.
I'm hearing all this for the first time. Okay, you and I haven't known each other that long, but I'm looking forward to a long friendship and having you with us this fall. But I'm hearing this with the audience tonight for the first time. This is fascinating. Have you written about this in a book, or will you be speaking about some of these kind of things at our fall conference? It can help us get an understanding. I mean, because this, I'm just telling you right now, this is fascinating. This is the kind of thing, this is the kind of information and history, inside ball game, right? Stuff that our audience wants to know. Have you written this in a book? Will you speak on these kind of things this fall for us?
No, because well, see, I absolutely can speak about it in the fall. See, so when I looked up the event in Hamtramck, so the Trump rally and the meeting that happened in May in Troy, so these are all within a matter of months before the election. I looked up Bullis because he was my biggest issue, and I was trying to figure out his family alliance. So that's the one that's the father-in-law to Tiffany. He comes from a Christian Lebanese family, but the Christians in Lebanon are usually aligned to the Hezbollah party because they have a confessional government. The president is always Christian, so they're always building alliances, and they are historically connected to Hezbollah, and apparently his father was, and they were very active in Lebanese politics. So I thought to myself, well, okay, this is somewhat alarming. And then when I looked at the guest list, I saw the same cast of characters from 25 years ago. And I contacted a number of my people that I know are active in the administration. And I said, do you guys know that these are the same cast of characters? And I didn't get much of a response other than, we will pass this along to the right people.
The article goes on to say, if the administration was caught unaware back in 2001, the George W. Bush administration, it may be because they placed their trust in one of the right's most influential activists, Grover Norquist. As the president of Americans for Tax Reform, Norquist is best known for his tireless crusades against big government. But one of Norquist's lesser known projects over the last few years has been bringing American Muslims into the Republican Party. And as he usually does, Norquist has succeeded. According to several sources, Norquist helped orchestrate various post-September 11th events that brought together Muslim leaders and administration officials. Quote, he worked with Muslim leaders to engineer Bush's prominent visit to the mosque, end quote, says the Arab American pollster John Zogby to the president's September 7th trip to the Islamic Center of Washington, says Zogby, who counts Norquist among his clients. Quote, he's central to the White House outreach, end quote. Wowee. So you mentioned
So if you really want to have fun one day, you need to look up the fight between Frank Gaffney and Grover. I think it was at CPAC one year, but apparently they had a screaming match. So if you Google public fight Frank Gaffney and Grover Norquist, they had it out about this because Frank's Center for Security Policy was next door to the Islamic Institute. And so there are a number of articles that were written about these fights between them because Frank physically saw these people going into that office and then was complaining to Grover about it. And then eventually there was a public falling out between them. And people are not sure. So people
look at that.
Grover was
You've already mentioned. You already mentioned this guy, David Frum. Didn't you just mention him as a former Bush speechwriter?
Yes, he was a speechwriter.
He wrote the article.
Oh, did he? Is he the one that wrote it?
Yeah, David Frum wrote it, February 17th, 2011. David Frum, The Secret History of Gaffney-Norquist Feud. That's at the Center for Security Policy, right there.
Nice. Yeah, so I had a meeting with David while he was still in the White House trying to explain this whole thing. And he had heard it from Frank, and he just wanted to hear my perspective as a Muslim and a community member. And so he was a great ally. I think he did try his best.
Well, this brings us to Richard Grenell. So you're saying you were dealing with Richard Grenell 25 years ago, and now Richard Grenell's in the White House or around the president in key positions. Sorry,
not
he would be.
Grenell. No, I was not dealing with Richard Grenell. Khalid Safori, who was one of the members at the event. Khalid Safori, not Richard Grenell. I actually don't know how Richard Grenell gets in here. I didn't get to do a deep dive on that. I don't understand how he resurfaced, but the Arab Americans that were invited by Bullis and Bahba, the Palestinian interlocutor who you had the article about, and Grenell organized the meeting. So I recognize the names of the Arab Americans, not Richard Grenell.
Okay, great. Glad you clarified that. Okay, so how is this happening? Because when we were at the White House, I shook his hand and introduced myself and had a very, very brief conversation with Gorka, who I know you know and have worked with for a few decades, I think. I mean, he must be pulling his hair out, right?
I don't know. I don't want to keep pinging him with this crazy stuff. I know he knows it. So I don't want to be one of those annoying people that is like, do you know what's happening? Because I know he knows. And I know he knows what a problem it is. But again, this is diplomacy. I mean, the president went and met with Ahmed Ashara, the former head of ISIS and Jabhat al-Nusra that's killed thousands of Americans. So there is a active negotiation for Trump to pursue peace, and he thinks these are legitimate actors. And I guess when you're trying to make peace with your enemies, you talk to your enemies. I think that's the way this theory goes. I don't think anyone's delusional about who they're dealing with. I think these people's history is quite clear. If I'm able to do it with open source intelligence, obviously people with, TSSCI clearances are able to find the same information, if not more. So I don't think they're doing it naively. Under President Bush, I believe it was naive. But now I think they are in active negotiations with Hamas and therefore want to speak with legitimate Hamas interlocutors.
So do you agree with it? Do you disagree with it? And if you do disagree with it, how would you, with all your years of background and knowledge and coming out of Islam, how would you do it differently?
I don't agree with it, and then I don't have a suggestion for how you do it better, except that you can't ever believe that these people are honest brokers. And again, we just have to look at the history of Hamas ruling that territory in Gaza since 2015. We didn't get peace. We didn't get economic prosperity. We got tunnels and rockets. So I just don't understand how we think we can sit across the table from them and think we're going to get honest solutions to a problem. I don't believe they want a solution to the problem. So what do we do as the U.S. government, and especially a president that is really focused on his legacy being peace in the Middle East? I think that puts us in a quagmire. I don't know how you solve that problem when you're so actively pursuing peace and you don't have an honest broker at the other side of the table. How do you achieve it? I can guarantee you that the Israelis and Israeli intelligence know these are not honest brokers and are probably disgusted with being back here again with the U.S. government using these kinds of people as interlocutors. But I don't know what's a better way other than freezing them out and imposing sanctions and trying to crush it.
Is this maybe why there seems to be, I don't know if there is, but there appears to be a little tension between President Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu? And we all saw the video of Netanyahu walking out of the executive office doors to get into his SUV, and President Trump walks him out, and Prime Minister Netanyahu is carrying a book. And it was reported later that he was carrying the book by President Trump, The Art of the Deal. So based on everything you're saying to me now, I'm wondering, was there a rather frank conversation between President Trump and Netanyahu about these kind of people and negotiating with him? And President Trump's like, look, you need to read my book, Art of the Deal, because this is what I'm doing here. I mean, I'm just speculating, but clearly that there's you're laughing. So, I mean, I'm thinking, can you imagine the conversation they had when they finally got in person, and what would precipitate him handing his book, Art of the Deal? You know, basically, this is what I'm doing. Now go read it. We'll talk later. I don't know. In my gut, do not believe there is a deal that we win if we're cutting deals, because I just think it furthers the jihadi agenda here in the United States and around the world. I think every time we compromise, and I think Israel's right, I'm sorry to say, but they are right. You cannot compromise with people who want you to die. I don't see what the compromise is. All right, take a look at this, Hadia. I covered this on radio today. Florida Congressman Randy Fine says what no one in Washington dares. Violent Islam is the norm. Peaceful Islam is the exception. Violent Islam, he says, not the exception. Peaceful Islam is the exception. We've gotten it entirely wrong. He went on to say there is a fundamentally broken culture that is fundamentally built on evil. Sometimes you must defeat evil. And we as a society have been unwilling to do that. In fact, we have coddled it. He goes on to say the Civil Rights Organization for Muslims in the United States is CARE. It is unquestionably a terrorist organization, a terrorist front. The leader of CARE stood up after October 7th and talked about how happy it made him, and he still has a job. It's not an extremist element. Violent Islam is mainstream. In the United States, the nexus of Muslim terror is in our universities. We paid for him, the Washington, D.C. terrorist, to be brainwashed, and we've got to stop it. And he goes on to basically say that we don't have enough people in Washington speaking truth about Islam. We're coddling it. What do you make of this Jewish brand new congressman? I met him briefly when we were on Capitol Hill, told him we wanted to get him on the program. He said, absolutely, call my office. Let's set it up. So we got to do that. But what do you make of his comments?
I'd like to add a nuance. I think, so I used to tell people back in the early 2000s, we are radicalizing the middle. In other words, as the Western nations continue to coddle radical or violent Islam, it ends up radicalizing the middle or the moderates because they see them as the ones in power. So I think we've seen a very dangerous rise in radical Islamism. So I don't think they're as the violent ones are the majority, but the radicalized ones are a majority. And what is the problem with that is they provide the institutional support, financial support, moral support. They're the ones that'll take you to the streets. They're the ones that'll go to the ballot boxes and elect the candidates they want. And so there's a rising support for this more radical narrative. And as a result, the progressive Muslims or the secular Muslims are drowned out by these groups. And the more every successive administration empowers these people, the more defeated the moderates and the pluralists and the secularists feel. And I know I felt this 30 years ago, that we were a minority and we were constantly being outplayed, out fundraised, outgunned by these groups. And as a consequence, our voice got smaller and smaller. And that trend is just continuing. And then what happens to our society as a consequence?
This is fascinating what you just said. I want to just hammer that out a little bit more because I hope our audience understood and grasped the amazing analysis there. As you give as she described it, the radical Islamist more and more attention, more and more of a seat at the table, more and more prominence at the highest levels of our government in Washington, D.C., the more it demoralizes the moderate Muslims, but the more it attracts the moderate Muslim to join the radical Islamist because they see it's working for them. Apparently, this is how you get ahead. You get a seat at the table. So it's discouraging them, but at the same time, it's drawing them in, the moderates, to join the radical Islamists. Is that what you just said?
Exactly. Absolutely.
Wow. So at the end of the day, we're building their coalition for them. We're helping to make their radical, if you will, Islamic coalition bigger. I mean, I know there's only one Islam, right? There's only one Islam. So I know my audience will get mad at me for saying radical Islam versus, moderate Islam versus Islam. But I do know there are Muslims that are not, they're pork-eating, beer-drinking Muslims, like my friend Sharam Hadian's daddy was, His mom was Muslim. He loved his mother. He said she would have been a great neighbor to you. She wouldn't have bothered you one bit. They didn't really practice. They were Muslim by heritage. I mean, his daddy's the one that took the family out of Iran 6 weeks before the fall of the Shah, because he's like, I'm not living under this. I'm not living under Sharia. So I know there's only one Islam, but there are Muslims that don't want to really practice, just like you have Catholics that don't want to practice. You have Southern Baptists that don't really want to practice, but anyway, show up at Easter and Christmas or whatever. So I understand that. I want to make sure the audience understands what I'm saying. But what you're saying is those who want to actually follow the Quran, follow the Hadiths, they really, the ones that are really doing this, Sharia, the ones who are more Americanized, if you will, they have mainstreamed, they have assimilated, they're now realizing, what has that gotten me? The ones that are getting the access and the power and the money and the organizations and the fundraising are the ones that are not mainstreaming. So we are helping to build their Islamic power base by catering to them and thus drawing in the ones that we're trying to assimilate and be Americans.
Very good. That's exactly what I was trying to say. It pays to be a radical. It pays to be counterculture. It pays to be a squeaky wheel. It encourages people to want to protest. I tell people all the time, you would not have ever seen a bunch of Muslim Arab kids on college campuses rioting 10 years ago. They just didn't feel emboldened to do that. They were afraid. They thought they would be persecuted. And now, also with the help of the radical left, they're also being emboldened. So both on the right and the left, the radical Muslim groups have a seat at the table. So why would the majority, and I want to put a little nuance on this whole thing about there being one Islam. And the reason I make these distinctions is because there is a segment of the Muslim population that either does not practice, so kind of like Jewish people where they just are secular, some don't even believe in God, they identify with being Muslim by culture. So there's a whole segment of those people, but there's also a segment of people who try to follow Islam but are trying to reform it. In other words, they take the Quran and they say, this is a guidebook. It's not supposed to be literal. And so they put verses in historical context, anything that's violent, anything that says, you can't befriend the Jews and the Christians. And they say that was for, pre-civilized Arabia. That's not something we're going to do today. So they're constantly trying to reform their religion, but they're entirely drowned out by this group of jihadis that are sponsored by overseas governments to build a network in the United States to change our way of life. So how do they gain momentum for that effort? They don't.
Okay, so in closing, Hadia, what do you see coming then? What do you see, if you had to guess, in 4 years, President Trump, steps off the world stage, what has he accomplished with the Abraham Accords, the Middle East, or is it just more of the same, another president who tried and nothing happened? I guess I keep waiting on an Antichrist figure to come up on the scene. I'm not looking for the Antichrist. I'm looking for Christ to return. But the Bible tells me there's going to be a figure that comes, and he has to rip out 3 of these groups by the roots. These 3 of these nation groups, he has to rip them out by the roots. So to get his 10 nation federation, 10 horns or 10 kings who have not yet received a kingdom, but who will, and then get for 1 hour and give their power to the beast. So for a little time, they get their power and they give it to the beast. But he's going to have to rip out 3 of these groups by the roots to get what he wants. I think that's Daniel 7. So I'm thinking a lot of this is not going to come into being until the Antichrist gets here and he shows up with, the idea of him being a peacemaker, but you end up, of course, obviously with war. So I'm wondering how much of this will never be done until that figure shows up. What do you think?
I'm with you. I'm just wondering if the Antichrist is going to just pop up from around the corner, because if there is this movement towards peace, as Christians, that's what we believe comes next, is then the Antichrist figure appears. And, you've outlaid the specifics, but it's surreal to me. It's literally watching the Bible come to life. And you just want to pick up Daniel and Revelation, look and Ezekiel and be like, wait a minute, is this what I'm seeing? Because it's astonishing. It's astonishing. I don't know if it's all going to be for nothing, if it's all going to end up failing, because when the president goes and solicits multi-billion-dollar, total trillions of dollars investment from Arab countries into the United States, including in our colleges, and yet cramps down and prevents student visas and basically wants to kick out all foreign students from Harvard, how do those two things coexist? I don't know how that relationship survives that kind of attention. So I'm just wondering, he's the man of the art of the deal. So maybe he knows what he's doing in these seemingly contradictory approaches. But to me, I'm not quite sure how this ends up, except that we continue to have Muslim city, Sharia-based enclaves. And if this one in Epic City doesn't stop, then how many more are going to pop up? And what are we really doing about helping, progressive, culturally Muslim people integrate into American society and assimilate and adopt our values and try to reform their religion so that it's not this eternal threat? I don't know how far we get with any of that.
What do you think, to have the Abraham Accords actually happen, what do you think the Arab nations are going to require of Israel when it comes to a Palestinian state? Are they going to require that? Or are they going to do that in Egypt and set something up there? Or what country might they go to? Jordan? I don't know. I guess what I'm trying to get to is, if the Abraham Accords being pushed by President Trump requires Israel to give up land, isn't that inviting God's judgment on America? And are there maybe some people who are aware of this in his administration who are saying, look, if you want to get the Abraham Accords, and some of the Arab nations are saying we got to have a place for these Palestinians, then let's do it over here. But let's not divide Israel. Is there any chance they could get what they wanted without dividing the land in Israel?
So my understanding is that the Abraham Accords, the premise of it is that they did not need to solve the Palestinian-Israeli problem in order to have normalized relations with the other Middle East countries. So I actually had understood it to be a workaround. But if Saudi and the other countries that have not yet signed decide, no, you're going to have to create a state, well, then one of them is going to have to cough up the land. As of now, Egypt, Jordan, Turkey, all of the neighbors are like, no way, we're not taking the Palestinians. So I don't understand who is going to step up. I mean, I can't see at this point who's going to step up and be the one that takes in and creates a new Palestinian state. And that we don't divide up Israel. I think the president will end up in a lot of the articles I read about Bahba and Bolis. They're pushing for a two-state solution. So I'd be curious. I know there's a lot of people around him, including the Evangelical Advisory Council that he has, that would definitely advise against him dividing up Israel. But I think it's anyone's guess what ultimately is going to end up at the table. I don't think it's entirely clear right now.
I think Mike Huckabee would have something to say about all that too, for sure. Can you give us your website for our audience to follow you and support your organization?
Thank you. It's resurrectministry.com, and you can drop me a line, send me a comment. You'd like to partner with this ministry, that's the best place to find me.
Resurrectministry.com.
Yes.
Excellent. Hadia, as always, thank you for your time, your ministry, your insights, your wisdom. A fascinating conversation, Hadia. Looking forward to having you also back again soon and at the fall conference this fall.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Hadia checking in, folks. Check out her website, will you? And again, remember, she'll be with us this fall as a Thursday night banquet speaker, but then also part of Friday and Saturday, along with the other speakers. Full details and tickets at worldviewstore.com. Again, they're only $99. We greatly lowered the price of the ticket by like more than half because we were able to save a lot of money going to the Mid-South, pass the savings on to you. We only have seating for 350 people. The rest of you who join the vault will be able to live stream it. We'd love to have you there in person. You can actually visit with people like Hadia and Gordon Chang and Sidney Powell and the rest of them. There you go, worldviewstore.com, worldviewstore.com. We'll be right back after this break. July 6, 2005. This is Tom Harper. Man figures plankton stopped his rare cancer. We got more of a response from our viewers than anything else you and I have ever discussed.
Tom Harper, 20 years ago, he had mesothelioma, deadly lung cancer, was given weeks to live, and he just intuitively started to eat the phytoplankton out of his fish tanks because he fed the phytoplankton to his shellfish. He was a shellfish farmer. And when he went in for the surgery, the surgeon came out of the operating room and told his family, I have not ever seen anything like it. The cancer is benign, and Tom Harper lived for years. He retired in Hawaii. We're not making any claim.
Here he is in his own words.
Started on a daily routine of just taking a bit of paste, putting it in my mouth, and wash it down with a drink of water. Within about 10 to 15 days, here I am, less pain in my back. I knew that something was going on, so I just kept eating half a teaspoon of this paste a day. I was booked to go for surgery in Victoria where they were going to do what they call a talc treatment. They went in there to have a look, saw something they never seen before, took 11 sites, sent them away for biopsy. I got the news back. Everything was benign. They just did not know what to make of it. Everything was absolutely clean. And I've tried dieting all my life because I'm a diabetic. If it's a coincidence or not, I don't know. My blood sugar started dropping. My weight started falling off. Here I am, no longer requiring insulin, and I was taking 88 units a day of insulin. I can eat just about what I want in moderation, and I have no elevated sugar levels, and I feel fabulous.
People, you hear the word cancer and they want you to be instilled with fear. Cancer is nothing but a profound failure of the immune system. And what happened with Tom Harper is the phytoplankton is microscopic. It's God's microscopic food. And the Gatatiana is the most nutritionally comprehensive strain phytoplankton in the world. David Hunter studied phytoplankton for 20 years because he worked for Tom Harper and he was there in person and witnessed Tom's recovery. It's about getting pure nutrition inside your cells. And what happens, your body balances again or goes back to homeostasis. And when your body is pH balanced or in homeostasis, disease can't grow. It is literally microscopic, pure single cell plant food with protein and omega-3 fatty acids, omega-6 fatty acids, with amino acids and vitamins and minerals. One scoop a day. There's 90 billion plant cells in here just for everyday nutrition and energy and, cognitive support, because this is God's pure nutrition.
Go to melissahousegpa.com today. Discover the science and learn more about the wonderful benefits of Gaditana phytoplankton. That's melissahousegpa.com. melissahousegpa.com.